The arena was not silent, not yet. It was vibrating with that specific frequency of anticipation that only exists in professional wrestling. Thousands of people were waiting for a hero. They were waiting for the bright colors, the upbeat pop music, and the signature wave that had defined her career for the last 5 years. The screens were meant to flash pink and gold. The pyrotechnics were primed to explode in a celebration of returning virtue. But as the countdown clock on the Titantron hit 0, the expected explosion didn't happen. Instead, the arena was plunged into a total suffocating darkness. There was no music. There was no sudden crash of drums. For 10 agonizing seconds, 20,000 people sat in a void. Then, a low, mechanical hum began to rise from the floor speakers, shaking the seats. It wasn't a song. It was a frequency, uncomfortable and heavy. A single spotlight cut through the blackness, hitting the top of the entrance ramp. But it didn't illuminate a person. It illuminated a thick, rolling fog that seemed to pour out from backstage like a physical liquid, spilling over the edge of the stage and creeping down the ramp. The camera focused tight on the mist. The audience, usually so quick to cheer or boo, was frozen in confusion. This wasn't the return they had bought tickets for. This was something foreign. The air in the stadium seemed to drop 10 degrees. In the minimalist animation of this moment, visualize the crowd not as individual faces, but as a sea of gray static, falling still. The only movement is the slow, predatory creep of the fog. It was the first signal that the woman they loved hadn't just changed her gear. She had changed her very soul. The atmosphere shifted from excitement to a primal, instinctive wariness. Out of that artificial storm, a silhouette finally emerged. The walk was different. Gone was the energetic bounce, the slapping of hands with fans at the barricade. This figure moved with a terrifying, gliding slowness, as if underwater. As she stepped into the singular pool of white light, the gasp from the audience was audible on the broadcast. It wasn't a cheer. It was the sound of collective shock. She was unrecognizable. The vibrant colors were gone, replaced by a matte black attire that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Her hair, once loose and flowing, was slicked back severely, sharpening her features into something angular and cruel. But it was the eyes that truly unsettled the masses. She wore contact lenses that turned her irises into a pale, milky white. She looked blind, yet she stared directly into the hard camera with a focus that pierced through the screen. There was no smile. There was no scowl. There was just a blank, terrifying neutrality. She didn't acknowledge the fans. She didn't look at the signs held up by children asking for her autograph. She simply stood there, letting the fog swirl around her boots. In that moment, the history of her character, the underdog victories, the charity work, the smiles, was incinerated. The visual storytelling was absolute. She hadn't come back to reclaim her spot on the roster. She had come back to burn the roster down. The minimalism of her movement made it more effective. If she had screamed, it would have been wrestling. She stood in silence. It felt like horror. The commentary team, usually so chatty, remained dead silent for a full 30 seconds, letting the image burn itself into the minds of millions watching around the world. The camera panned to the front row, and this is where the true weight of the transformation settled in. Usually wrestling relies on the suspension of disbelief, but the emotions on the faces of the younger fans were very real. We saw a young girl, perhaps 7 years old, wearing the merchandise of the woman who used to be a hero. She was holding a homemade sign that read, "Welcome Home." As the wrestler walked past, cold and detached, the girl lowered the sign. She didn't understand the nuance of a heel turn. She only understood that her hero was looking right through her. This is the emotional collateral damage of such a drastic persona shift. It wasn't just a costume change. It was a betrayal of trust. The arena began to murmur, a low buzzing sound like a disturbed hive. They didn't know how to react. Did they boo? They cheered the coolness of the new look. They were paralyzed by the severance of the bond they thought they had. The wrestler climbed the steel steps, not with agility, but with the heavy, methodical plodding of an executioner ascending the scaffold. She entered the ring and stood in the center. The lights stayed dim. She didn't ask for a microphone. She simply looked at the audience, turning slowly to face all 4 sides of the arena. It was a look of judgment. The narrative had shifted from "I am happy to be here" to "You do not deserve me." The heartbreak in the arena was palpable. It felt heavy, like a breakup occurring in public. The minimalist animation here would focus on the distance, the vast, unbridgeable gap that had suddenly opened up between the figure in the spotlight and the thousands of shadows surrounding her. While the arena was gripped in a tense stillness, the digital world was catching fire. Phones lit up the stands like fireflies as thousands of people took to social media instantly. The image of her new pale-eyed stare became the most shared picture on the internet within minutes. The conversation wasn't about match quality or storylines. It was about fear and confusion. Why was the trending topic. Fans were analyzing every frame of her entrance, looking for clues, looking for a reason why the Princess of the Ring had become the Witch of 2025. This reaction is crucial to the modern wrestling landscape. The performance didn't end at the ropes. It extended into the pockets of everyone watching. People felt personally attacked. Longtime supporters posted videos burning her merchandise. Others, the ones who craved chaos, began declaring this the greatest character reinvention of the decade. The divide was instant and sharp. The story had successfully bled out of the fictional world and into the real emotions of the viewer. The commentary team finally broke their silence, their voices hushed and serious. They didn't use their announcer voices. They spoke like news anchors reporting a tragedy. "I don't know who that is," one of them whispered. "That looks like her, but there is nothing left of the woman we knew." This validation from the announcers solidified the reality for the viewers at home. It confirmed that this wasn't a joke. It wasn't a temporary glitch. The internet speculation ran wild. Was she possessed? Was she broken? Or was she finally revealing who she had always been? The mystery fueled the engagement, turning a simple return segment into a viral cultural moment. The broadcast cut to the backstage area, a rare glimpse behind the curtain that felt unauthorized, adding to the realism. Usually, the backstage area is chaotic. Wrestlers warming up, producers shouting, equipment moving. But in this shot, everyone was still. A group of superstars, some of them champions, were gathered around a small monitor mounted on a travel crate. Their body language told the story. Arms crossed, hands over mouths, eyes wide. These were her peers, the people who traveled the roads with her, who knew her real name and her real family. Even they looked disturbed. This implies a narrative layer that the evil wasn't just a show for the fans. She had isolated herself from her colleagues too. The blurring of the lines between the person and the persona is where true wrestling drama thrives. We saw a former tag team partner of hers shake her head and walk away from the monitor, refusing to watch anymore. It suggested deep, personal history being severed in real time. The camera lingered on the monitor, showing the woman in the ring standing perfectly still. The fear in the locker room wasn't physical fear. These are professional fighters, after all. It was the fear of the unknown. When someone breaks the social contract of the locker room, when they stop smiling and stop playing along, they become dangerous. The hierarchy of the women's division had been shattered in 5 minutes without a single punch being thrown. The minimalist art style here would depict the other wrestlers as small, huddled shapes, contrasted against the looming, singular presence of the woman on the screen, emphasizing her dominance and their sudden insignificance. Cut to the gorilla position, the nerve center just behind the entrance curtain, where the owner and the producer sit. Usually when a segment goes this well, there are high fives and handshakes. But the atmosphere here was tense. The producers were looking at each other, checking their headsets. The script had called for a promo for her to speak and explain her actions. But she was still silent in the ring. She was going off script, not by saying the wrong thing, but by saying nothing at all. This creates a narrative of danger. Is management in control? Or have they unleashed something they can't leash? The producer signaled for the timekeeper to ring the bell or cut to commercial, but the owner held up a hand. "Let it breathe," the gesture said. They were capitalizing on the discomfort. They knew they were capturing lightning in a bottle, even if that lightning was dark and destructive. The tension in the control room mirrored the tension in the ring. They were watching the time cues, sweating as the seconds ticked by of dead air, the cardinal sin of television. Yet the ratings were spiking. People weren't changing the channel. They were calling their friends to turn it on. The management realized in this section that they had a monster on their hands. A profitable monster, but a monster nonetheless. The realization that they might have to sacrifice the morale of the locker room to feed this new storyline began to dawn on them. It was a deal with the devil, signed in silence and fog. The corporate machine was just as stunned as the crying child in the front row. Back in the ring, the wrestler finally moved. She slowly raised the microphone to her lips. The crowd leaned in, 20,000 people holding their breath at once. The sound of the air conditioning became audible. She opened her mouth, took a breath, and then lowered the microphone. She dropped it. The thud of the mic hitting the canvas echoed like a gunshot. She shook her head slowly, a look of utter disappointment on her face. This was the ultimate psychological power play. By refusing to speak, she forced the audience to project their own insecurities onto her. If she had given a speech about how the fans turned their back on her, it would have been a cliché. It would have been standard wrestling villainy. But silence is arrogant. Silence says, "You aren't worth my breath." It was a masterclass in minimalism. She was denying them the one thing they wanted, an explanation. She turned to the ropes and exited the ring, not through the stairs, but by sliding under the bottom rope like a snake slithering back into the grass. She walked up the ramp, her back to the camera, her back to the fans, her back to the world. The refusal to engage was far more hurtful than any insult she could have shouted. It left the emotional wound open. The audience felt dismissed. They felt small. She had taken the power dynamic of the performer and the spectator and completely reversed it. Usually the wrestler performs for the crowd's pleasure. Tonight she existed only for herself, and the crowd was merely witnessing her existence. If we could hear her thoughts in this moment, in the quiet solitude of her own mind as she walked up that ramp, what would they be at? This section of the story invites us to speculate on the internal burden of the good girl. For years, she had to smile when she was tired. She had to sign autographs when she was hurt. She had to be the role model, the perfect geometric shape that fit into the corporate box. Perhaps this evil wasn't evil at all. Perhaps it was exhaustion. There is a specific kind of darkness that comes from years of suppressing your true self to please others. The fog, the black clothes, the pale eyes, maybe they weren't a costume. Maybe they were armor. She was protecting herself from the demands of the world. She had realized that being loved by everyone is a prison. To be hated, to be feared, that is true freedom. As she reached the top of the stage, she didn't look back. The pop of the crowd didn't matter anymore. The approval of the office didn't matter. She was operating on a different wavelength, driven by a cold, hard necessity to survive the industry that eats its young. The narrative weight here is about the cost of fame. The girl who left months ago was a people pleaser. The woman who returned was a queen who had burned her own kingdom to save herself. It creates a complex villain, one we are terrified of, but if we look deep enough, one we strangely understand. Just as she reached the curtain to disappear, the music of the current women's champion hit. The crowd exploded, a release of tension. The champion walked out, belt over her shoulder, a look of confusion and defiance on her face. She blocked the path of the evil persona. It was the classic confrontation. The light versus the dark. The champion shouted something, pointing at the crowd, likely demanding an explanation for the disrespect. The evil figure didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, letting the champion vent, letting the champion get close. Then, with a speed that contradicted her slow entrance, she struck. It wasn't a wrestling move. It wasn't a grapple. It was a singular, stiff strike to the throat. The champion collapsed, gasping for air, clutching the gold belt. The attack was efficient, brutal, and devoid of showmanship. It was violence without passion. She stood over the fallen champion. She didn't pick up the title belt. She didn't taunt the crowd. She simply looked down at the symbol of success, the gold and leather strap hand stepped on it. She crushed the prestigious title under her black boot, grinding her heel into the metal plates. This was the declaration of war. She wasn't here to win championships. She was here to destroy the concept of them. She was here to dismantle the system that created her. The visual of the dark boot on the gold belt was the defining image of the night, a symbol that 2025 would be a year of anarchy. The show went off the air with a close-up of her face. For a split second, the mask slipped. Just a fraction. The camera caught a micro-expression in those pale, contact lens-covered eyes. Was it regret? Was it sadness? Or was it pity? This is the twist that adds depth to the viral moment. She isn't a monster because she hates the fans. She has become this because she is a mirror. She is reflecting the cynicism, the impatience, and the darkness of the modern world back at the audience. We created her. The toxicity of social media, the demanding nature of fandom, the constant hunger for the next big thing, all of that negativity coalesced and formed this persona. She is the ghost of everything the audience did to her. As the screen faded to black, the logo of the WWE appeared in the corner, but the feeling wasn't one of excitement. It was a haunting realization. The story of 2025 wouldn't be about a hero overcoming the odds. It would be a tragedy about what happens when you push a hero too far. The evil persona wasn't the villain of the story. She was the consequence. And as the feed cut, leaving millions in silence, the question wasn't, who will beat her? The question was, do we deserve to be forgiven by her? The fog had lifted, but the darkness was here to stay.